So, what is the biggest and best skill in Battlefield 5, or in Battlefield games in general, or even in FPS games in general? Of course, being in my own opinion, and after I've explained what this is going to be, I will go into 7 to 8 different ways that you can improve this, specifically in Battlefield 5. Timestamps, as well as any links to any relevant videos that will apply to this video, will be in the top comment below. So, what is the best skill, in my opinion, in Battlefield 5? This skill is going to be long range ability, or closely linked, effectively accuracy at long range. And if I can try and explain this in the most concise way possible, Battlefield is well known for its very large, open, unique and expansive maps, which in comparison to other major FPS titles like Call of Duty, of course, which we know has maps like the size of the average toilet in someone's house. And as a result of having these large, open and expansive Battlefield maps, there's a diverse range of playstyle options that cater towards close range, medium and long range. Of course, some maps catering more towards one way or the other. But because of these long range maps, I overall believe that long range ability or accuracy at range, however you want to call this skill, is going to be the skill with the biggest skill gap and improvable learning curve out of all other skills in the game, in Battlefield in general, simply because any target you see in the distance at those long distances on these long range maps, you should be able to and want to be able to shoot and try to get those kills. Just imagine that you're playing on a game of Rotterdam, standing on the centre of the bridge in the middle of the map, and you're holding a Gewehr 43 or even a Kar 98 bolt action sniper. You might see 120 enemies over the course of that game from that specific point in the map, of which those weapons you've got have got the ability to be able to shoot at with a good damage at that range and take out pretty much any enemy you can see anywhere on the map. Change that to a close range SMG like the ZK383 and your range is severely capped at 30 to 40 meters. Now you might see 120 enemies from that spot on Rotterdam, but you might be limited to actually only being maybe 30 enemies that are around that radius of that center of that point of the bridge, and therefore your kills is completely capped. And lastly, before we get into the different ways to improve this skill level, and before someone leaves a comment complaining that they don't want to use long range weapons and only stay in one part of the map, my point, which I just explained a second ago, is not about staying in one spot for the entirety of the game, or only using long range weapons like a bolt action sniper, or a semi-automatic assault rifle. My point is that anywhere on any game mode, on any map, you're going to have that radius around you, which incorporates all these different things I'm about to talk about, including the weapon you're using and the effective range of that weapon, your skill level in general at long range encounters, no matter what gun you're using. So you could be someone who's got an above average skill level with a ZK, in which case you can be effective with it up to 40 or 50 meters, whereas maybe the average player is only effective, at 25 to 30 meters. So this skill level of long range ability is for using any gun. It's whatever is considered long range for the gun you're using. 100 meters, this might be considered long range for a Gewehr 43. The same as long range may be considered 40 meters for a ZK383. So any gun and incorporating in all these different things. So let's get straight into it. Here we can see the change in size of a target at 100 meters at 3 different FOV ranges, being the default 55 versus 2 high popular FOVs of 90 and 105. And we can clearly see here that the higher the FOV is, the smaller those targets and objects are going to be on screen. Next to the timestamp in the top comment, I have put a link to my video of high versus low FOV. In short, I'm not expecting everybody to go and use, default super low 55 like I do, but I am going to explain that lowering slightly the FOV can be a way to improve your ability at long range. Targets will appear bigger, therefore your reaction time for targets at longer distances will be much faster. You'll be able to see targets first and therefore probably aim in and be the first one to shoot off bullets. As well as identifying enemies at range faster will mean you'll have more time to kill them at range, which is obviously going to take more bullets at range with greater damage drop-off, depending on what gun you're using. But identifying them sooner and reacting sooner at those longer ranges is, of course, going to mean you can have more time to kill them before they are able to run and get behind cover. Lowering FOV does mean you lose out visibility on the sides, but people generally have an aggressive playstyle when they use high FOV, and I feel like on any aggressive map like Underground, it's such close quarters and such close range, you've always got a wall on your left or your right, no matter what FOV you're on, and therefore you don't really need to see to the sides. Next, we have sensitivity, and again, looking at a target of 100 meters with different sensitivity levels. The overall principle here is your sensitivity of your sight does not change. However, a close range target will allow you to have maximum input with your thumbstick to the left or the right to track targets. But the longer the distance the target is away from you on screen, the more careful you have to be with the input, because a small touch at a long range target could drag your sight way off target. A lower sensitivity therefore grants you a much greater range of input on your thumbstick the further targets are away in the distance. You might question, well, at close range now I'm going to have slow aim and it's going to affect me being able to get kills. However, if you can practice and go in the firing range and learn to aim in pretty much on target or within a close range of of the enemy's body or head, you should never have to worry about moving the thumbstick very far. I would also advise to turn off aim acceleration, which increases in speed the more you hold the thumbstick. This makes it extremely hard to track moving targets at distance. Specializations is the next point, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Choose any specs you can, as shown, that increase accuracy, bullet velocity to be able to track targets, or even specialist ones, such as bipod, the low drag rounds, or variable zoom. Next, we have the ability to use different types of fire modes to maintain accuracy at long range. And you can see here, starting off just then with full auto at the closest range possible, cycling through the different distances, and of course, the further the distance away we get, we change down to the more accurate different fire modes, going from full auto to burst fire to tap fire, finally to changing the select fire option by holding down triangle on the PlayStation to go to semi-auto fire mode, which you can see here. Once we got to 50 meters and above, you can pretty much hit every single shot if you use semi-auto mode, even tap fire mode at that distance. This is one of the most important points in the video, and the overall benefit of this, firstly, is ammo management. When you're shooting at enemies at long distance and you maintain a high accuracy, you can get a kill in literally 5 to 6 bullets, often maintaining close to 100% accuracy. As a result, after you get that long distance kill, you will be left with 20-25 rounds in your 30 round magazine. You can simply then switch back to full auto and easily take out a oncoming close range enemy. If you just waste half or even the whole magazine using full auto at a long range target, you're going to likely die while getting caught out reloading. So you don't have to reload as much, can maintain accuracy and kill enemies faster by firing slower. Next, we have an obvious one, and that is going to be gun choice. As I said at the start of the video, I'm not specifically forcing anyone, for example on Rotterdam, having to use a sniper rifle or a semi-automatic assault rifle. Use a long-range weapon, for example on this map, with whatever class you want to play. If you are the typical ZK user and you don't have a lot of fun playing Rotterdam, then I would definitely suggest going and using a Sten, which is probably the best long-range SMG in the game. This will make you have a much better time and get you a lot more kills and win a lot more gunfights, while also being able to do a lot less running while not finding any enemies. Likewise, if you do just want to use long-range weapons for the majority of long-range maps, or aggressive weapons for close-range maps, that will be the best. Next, we have choice of sights, and you can see here the bar with iron sights with a body which covers the majority of the screen, and this happens with a lot of different weapons, in comparison to using the reflex sight, which, as you can see there, gives a much better and more clear picture. Scopes are also very important, and here you can see a comparison of the Arasaka, which has a similar sight pretty much to the Lee Enfield in comparison to the Kar 98 at different ranges. The Lee Enfield and the Arasaka, which have a thick post, you can see at long distances will block the body or head of the enemy the further distance away you are. The Kar 98K, on the other hand, has a very thin post and can allow you to maintain a better picture and therefore overall accuracy of enemies. And as you can see here, this is why I've only ever used the 3x scope on the Arasaka. I genuinely think it's one of the cleanest 3x scopes in the game. And the last point to say is, of course, don't forget the different zoom levels of different sight types. Use whichever suits you best for which map. And don't forget, the weapon body, which might cover the screen. It will also block your view of other targets that are moving on the screen while you're aimed in. And lastly, we have power positions. I do have a link next to the timestamp for this point in the top comment, where I've got 4 videos that cover the 5 best power positions on the 4 main favourite maps in Battlefield 5, being Armage, Underground, Rotterdam and Devastation. But the best example of a power position is definitely here on Rotterdam. As you can see me showing, this point on the centre of the bridge, a nice high elevated point, literally is in the centre with an equal distance to all the flags around it. You can literally see down all the different waterways, cutting off the flow of enemies who are running across the map on both down the waterfront and inland. So that goes from B to D, as well as A to C and A to C to E. So from both of the spawns of the German and British side. And obviously you can cut off all super long lines of sight down the entirety of the map on the bridge. If we change that and go to a ZK, you can simply see, obviously from the clip preview I've put in here, and thinking back to the example I gave at the start of the video, think about the range you could now use this ZK to actually see and shoot enemies from this specific point, or just any point you're standing in general. Apologies for the final 2 little screenshots here. I could not get the quality to be good. They were compressed when I ported them in. But you can see here the difference of an SMG versus using a sniper in this specific spot for where you can actually see and shoot enemies. And you can go back and pause and look at the map I showed when you're using a sniper, and you can pretty much see that almost 90% of the map is covered by that red outline. And you might go, oh, well, it's not, but you have to remember there's a lot of buildings and areas of this map which are obviously not accessible and therefore not playable. And if you look at that map as well, you can see all the areas you can see from that power position pretty much cover the high flows of areas of where actual enemies go. Any areas that are actually playable on that screenshot are pretty much areas where enemies aren't genuinely ever going to be, or in spawns. So it just goes to show how using a long-range weapon or having long-range ability is so important. Anyways, that is the video. Please put a comment down below of which point you think is the most important, or which point has helped you the most. Apologies, as always, on these types of videos if I've gone into too much detail and rambled, but I always find that I always want to explain in the best way possible and not leave any detail out. Thanks for watching.